Hey, Miguel Iturrate back here on the CRP, and it's Saturday, June 15th. We are coming off Bellator's Broadway appearance at Madison Square Garden last night, Friday, June 14th. The fights were on the zone, and I'm joined by Devin Miller, our MMA ace, to go post-fight on this card, wrap it up a little bit. A lot of interesting stuff for Bellator, a strong card. Obviously, for Madison Square Garden, they're going to pull out all the stops. The zone, another good presentation. So we're in a situation where we had a Bellator showcase, no UFC this weekend. Boxing's waiting on the Tyson Fury fight tonight. So they had free reign of the.
Oh,
Can you hear me?
you froze up for a second.
Well, how'd you see the card overall?
All overall, I thought it was a pretty good event for Bellator. I think that in the prelims, we saw two potential prospects that they had continue to have losing skids with Heather Hardy and Aaron Pico, who was really starting to be groomed as a young, fresh face for Bellator. They both took hard losses. I think that was hard on them. But overall, the main card was good. They had a good main event, which I've said for a while now that I think the welterweight Grand Prix has been an overall success so far for Bellator. I think the welterweight division in Bellator is their deepest division at this point. Now they got a really good rematch set up for the finale of it. I thought the main event was a good fight. I definitely think the winner was more MacDonald, pretty clearly, just in terms of just the defense and sharper striking and just control. It was a good Legends match in the co-main event. Uh, both these guys, I really don't believe should be anywhere near title contention. They wouldn't be in the UFC, but nevertheless, it was a good fight. Machida put on a good show. Dylan Dennis is another young guy who fought a second MMA fight, world class jiu-jitsu star. Fought a can, but nevertheless, he got some cage experience. They got another 23-1 guy named Juan Archuleta, featherweight fighter, and then they had a good, and he pulled off a nice overhand right knockout, and they had a really good bantamweight bout between Horiguchi and Caldwell that could have gone either way on the scorecard. So I thought it was overall a pretty good card.
Yeah, just to talk a little bit more about the undercard. I don't know. Did you catch Mike Kimball's fight with Brandon Ruiz?
I didn't watch the undercard. I watched Pico's fight though.
Okay. Well, Kimball also he was the fourth fight out, so he's young and he talks the right game and he has some nice tools. But what I want to point out here is just another red flag with the New York State Boxing Commission. The judging on this card was ridiculous. We had two of the judges go 30-27 for Kimball. Means the right guy won, but the other judge had it 29-28 for Ruiz, the opponent, and there's just no feasible way that that can be explained by normal people just watching the fight. So definitely something you want to keep your eye on. The boxing commissions, especially the New York one, has had several issues here. And sometimes I don't know if it was a boxing judge doing MMA here, but sometimes more should be put into the judging here. This one got questionable. You could see on Ruiz's face when they called the first card for him that he was shocked. He was completely shocked that he had won a fight or one of the judges over at least. So something to keep an eye on there. Also, Robson Gracie Jr. won on the card. I believe he'd be Neiman's brother, Neiman, losing to Rory MacDonald in the main event. Let's talk MacDonald and Gracie in the main event and work our way down. Here's the thing is it was a close to pick 'em fight, and you had MacDonald coming off a performance where in the post fight he questioned a lot about why he fought and whether he would be able to continue and just the mind part of the game. MacDonald was not all there. So here he came out and he fought a very measured 25-minute fight. And, in my opinion, I think he won pretty clearly. So how'd you see it?
Yeah, I thought that he definitely won the control. I thought his jiu-jitsu defense was sharp because Neiman Gracie did throw in some good techniques. He threw up a good armbar at one point. He almost caught him in a knee bar, I think, in the second round. And right then when I saw how hard Rory fought to get out of that and he did it right. He circled to his back, put the other foot in the butt, pushed off, and squeezed his leg out. I knew right then that he was in it to win it for the night. He wasn't looking for a way out. He looked a little bit more aggressive in this fight. Neiman fought stealthy. He was solid. I mean, he survived, threw up some good techniques, but just his MMA transitioning is just not really there right now. He's a pretty much a specialist type of fighter, and he didn't really he didn't have the hand speed or the striking technique to really threaten MacDonald with anything. But Rory I still question. I mean, Rory was mounted in the 5th round. He was taken down on several occasions. John Fitch was taking him down. He still seems like a shell of the former fighter that we once saw of him. I don't favor him to win against Douglas Lima, even though he won a close decision over Lima when he first came into Bellator. I don't favor him to win that at this point, but nevertheless, this was a better performance for him than the John Fitch fight was. I think that some of the concerns about whether he wants to fight, I think, were put to rest because he did survive some close submission attempts and fought through them and stayed strong and went 5 full rounds and and took care of business and came away with the win. But I don't see him as near as intimidating and as much of a physically dominant fighter as what I once saw him as.
And that is Rory MacDonald retaining the welterweight belt and advancing to the final of the welterweight Grand Prix there. So, Lyoto and Chael Sonnen met at light heavyweight, huh?
Yeah, and it was a good fight.
What did you call it? A Legends match?
Yeah, that's the way I would define it. Is just two guys who are near.
Is that nicer than Geriatric League?
Yeah, it's a little bit nicer than that. Yeah, but these guys are toward the end of their career. They fought all the top guys pretty much for the past 10, 15 years in their career. Lyoto Machida, a former UFC light heavyweight champion. I mean, Chael Sonnen, former title contender. I thought this was a very predictable the way this fight played out. Machida does really well against wrestlers, always has. And Machida, 2 really good jumping knees that Chael Sonnen leaned right into with his shot. Chael came right out as expected and put the pressure on Machida right off the bat. Never really got anywhere with it. And Chael ends up hanging up the gloves after the fight, which was the big takeaway from the evening, really, was that Chael Sonnen, this was the last time we'll see Chael Sonnen. I thought it was only a matter of time before we do see him walking away because, he's got other outlets that he can do. He's got a show with Ariel Helwani on ESPN. He's got a popular YouTube channel. He's color commentating. He doesn't really need to be up in there fighting at 42 years old. And Machida really did just kind of walk through him, and so did Fedor. So I think this is a good time for him to walk away. I think we might see Machida rematch Ryan Bader now, which people might forget, but Machida knocked Bader cold in the UFC about 6-7 years ago. So that would be a rematch. But Machida's on a good run since entering Bellator. I think that's probably likely what we see next for Lyoto.
Yeah, and Bader's a little bit of a different animal nowadays. It'll be interesting to see how he gets back to light heavyweight. I mean, obviously, he'd done it throughout his whole career, but Bellator did give him the freedom to operate at heavyweight for the last few fights. And to be honest, he looked pretty good at 230. So getting back to 205, we'll see if that gives Lyoto a chance. If not, like I said, he's facing a different animal, so we'll see what the odds come up with there. As for Chael, 30-17-1 over his career. I mean, let's see if this is a real retirement. I could see a situation where Bellator has him do some mic work, or potentially, calling the fights there. And from there, that moving him back into the ring. I mean, they still have Vanderlei Silva. There's still a few things that can be done with the geriatric league, and Chael's not, not Chuck Liddell yet. You know what I mean? So I could see Chael coming back for one more. But, if he walks off into the sunset, he's done very well by himself. I'm happy for him. And, it's definitely a career that deserves more than an asterisk.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and he really did popularize. I mean, when I think of Chael Sonnen, is he really did show people how to self promote. I mean, he was who laid the groundwork for somebody like Conor McGregor to come in, and he understood to get how to self promote yourself and how to sell fights and how to garner attention to yourself uh, through outside the cage antics, and he popularized that. He did a great job of it, and he's gonna still be a face around Bellator and a face on ESPN, and people are gonna know about what Chael Sonnen's thinking these days going forward.
Skipping down through the card here a little bit, you want to talk about Dylan Dennis? He faced off against Max Humphrey. Humphrey really, shouldn't be at this level of his career on the main card, except for he's facing a guy who was involved in the whole Conor McGregor Khabib mess. Dennis, known for his jiu-jitsu, and he got the job done in round one as expected. I don't know that you could call that a true showcase. I think, like you said, it was a little bit of a mismatch.
It was a total mismatch, and it's just basically getting people getting fed to Dennis right now to get him some ring experience. This kid's only 25 years old. As you mentioned, he's involved with Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor's jiu-jitsu coach. He's a super high-level jiu-jitsu practitioner, but very relatively new in the world of MMA. This is only a second fight. Both have been in Bellator, and he's won both of them. Won his first fight by a toe hold, and then this one by an armbar. Not really facing any stiff competition at the moment, but what's garnered Dennis a lot of public hate is his. I mean, he's right there with Cejudo and Jessica I and Tony Ferguson for the king of cringe, because he's just really unlikable as a person. He gets on the microphone afterwards talking about how he's the best in the world, and he'd beat he would beat Khabib, he'd beat John Jones. I mean, all that. I mean, it's a little premature and ridiculous, but he is he's very good on the mat, and I think he'll develop into a decent fighter going forward. I expect Bellator to continue this for the next several fights of his, is to continue to maybe increase it a little bit, but they're going to develop him pretty slowly. Probably something they should have done with Aaron Pico, instead of throwing Pico in there with some groomed fighters already at 22 years old. But Dennis, I think Dennis is going to be a tough outing for anybody if he's able to get them on the mat. And I'm sure that he's working on the rest of his MMA game. So I think this is just the beginning of his career. But nevertheless, he took him down, submitted him. Not much more to say about that. It was pretty predictable.
Yep. Once again, though, Bellator, show a little integrity and put it on the undercard where it belongs. We don't need to see it on the main card. There were too many good fights, and some of the ones at the top of the undercard maybe belonged on there instead of that one. So something to think about. Speaking of the bantamweights, and probably a bantamweight fight could have benefited from more attention too, but they had Darren Caldwell, who's their title holder at 135, facing Kyoji Horiguchi, and Caldwell fought for the Risen title, and Horiguchi defeated Caldwell to go home with the Risen title. So this was Risen sending their champion for a rematch, kind of champion against champion, and it's kind of cool. Although Risen and Bellator are smaller organizations in the UFC, though, but it is cool to see international organizations working together, hyping a champion versus champion match. I saw Risen folks and Saki Kabara and several other people on their feeds and their social medias putting out, kudos to their guy both before and after the fight. So it's kind of cool when you get two organizations working together. It doesn't happen enough, and unfortunately, it's probably just standalone stuff. It's not something going forward.
Yeah, this one was, I think, one of the main storylines of the night because of what you were just talking about. Came out in the news earlier this week that Scott Coker did say that he would be open to cross promoting with the UFC. He thinks he has some killers, and I was going to do a video on that about Ryan Bader's the heavyweight and light heavyweight champion. I don't think he's in any position to fight DC or Jones. We've seen what happened with Bader in the UFC. But when you go down further from there, Bellator doesn't have very much depth, but they do have some good champions. I mean, Gegard Mousasi versus either Whitaker or Adesanya would be a great fight. They got Rory MacDonald, who beat Tyron Woodley, who fought hard against Rory MacDonald, or Douglas Lima. Whoever wins that, those are high level, top 10 world class welterweights, so they could be competitive. You go further down from that, you got Patricio Pitbull, who's the featherweight and the lightweight champion. He would be interesting, I think, against Max Holloway at featherweight. And now you have these two bantamweights. And when you look at Horiguchi, some say he might be one of the most skilled Japanese fighters in history, and it's not really an understatement. This guy, who was a former flyweight, was a standout at flyweight. He actually fought Demetrius Johnson for the title in the UFC. Since then, he's went on to pretty much win everything that he touches in Ryzen and Shudo. He lost a kickboxing match to Tenshin Nasukawa, the guy who boxed Floyd Mayweather. But as you mentioned, he won the Ryzen bantamweight title, and it was cool to see that they're working together. As you mentioned, he's now the Ryzen and the Bellator bantamweight champion. And Darian Caldwell, this was his second victory over Caldwell. He actually won in Ryzen over him too. But when it comes to this fight, Caldwell didn't fight a pretty fight. He was taking him down and just holding him there. But, I always think of Joe Rogan's comment about if somebody can take you down and hold you there for 5 minutes, tough, that's your job to defend it. And he was kind of gifted. Horiguchi was kind of gifted the decision here, I think, because most of the fight was Caldwell taking him down and holding him there. Wasn't doing much with it. And I do agree with that. So the score, how we score MMA is coming into play here. But one thing I do know, and why I've always been on the side that we should score takedowns appropriately, that takedowns do matter, that I'm not one of these that, we give too much stock into takedowns. If you're being taken down and held down at your hips against the fence, even if the person who's doing that's not doing a whole lot, he still had Horiguchi in a position that Horiguchi didn't want to be in for the majority of the fight. And so I thought this decision is definitely questionable, even though Horiguchi did the more damage. Caldwell definitely had the control for most of the fight, I thought. Took him down pretty much the entire fight, and Horiguchi didn't have much answer. Survived any kind of offense that Horiguchi had. So I think that this is one of those that I might end up looking and watching back to see how I really felt about this decision. But nevertheless, they give the decision unanimously to Horiguchi. When I don't know, it Caldwell definitely, like I said, took him down quite a bit and didn't do much with it. But how do you feel about that, Miguel?
I could go either way on that. I understand that a takedown is you've executed a positional advancement that you should get credit for at some point. If you go to the grappling world, almost every form of takedown, it earns you points, right? So you get, in some certain instances, you get points, more points for winding up, past the guard and things like that. So takedowns are definitely important, but in MMA, to me, a takedown has a little bit of an expiration date, and one of the problems is that the referees don't have any type of uniformity in bringing the fighters back to their feet if there really is inactivity, because there comes a point where if you've taken somebody down and you are in their guard or have them up against the fence, if you've stalled in a non-advancing position, then that's where the expiration date comes in. At some point, holding somebody down and controlling them is not enough if you're in an MMA fight. You should be looking to advance and looking to try to finish the fight, basically. Like I said, you get credit for the takedown, but at some point, if the takedown is leading to a stale situation and you're not taking advantage of, when you got the takedown, you've got the advantage. If you're not pressing the advantage, like I said, almost like an expiration date, you could be losing the advantage And at some point, if the ref stands you up, then you've got to question how you're going to judge that takedown in the overall scope of the round, because the ref was, standing you up. That means that there is some, that you failed on that takedown to a certain extent.
Yeah, I can see the argument both ways, but it was a little bit tricky for me because, as I mentioned, Horiguchi did continue to be put into a position that he didn't want to be in, and I didn't feel like Horiguchi was doing very much offense most of the fight. He never really had Caldwell threatened with anything,
Just
um,
peppering shots,
just
stayed
peppering
busy.
shots. So it was a close fight, but I think both these guys are solid bantamweights. I think Caldwell didn't put in a fan-worthy performance. I think that's gonna garner him a rematch anytime soon of this division. But Horiguchi, I think, is going to be going back and forth from Bellator to Ryzen. Um, I think that he is a top level guy at the smaller weight classes, and but I think that I still think that his preferred home was over there in Japan. I think that will be the case moving forward.
Well, yeah, I think at this point, he's got all the makings of becoming a star. He comes from the Shudo organization, and when you've gone through those wars in your career, what Shudo's been doing for the last 20, 25 years, you can pretty much say that the kid's battle tested and he's going to be okay in just about any fight. He took a loss earlier in his career to another Shudo fighter, and then won everything except when he faced Demetrius Johnson. Now, I guess Demetrius Johnson, he's the guy that Demetrius submitted with 1 second left in the fight, and then afterwards said, "Well, that's what I was planning to do all along." So I don't know. Maybe he can't defend himself in the press or whatever, or he maybe that discredits him and adds to Johnson's career. But I think you are talking about a pretty good uh, representative of Japan in this weight class, and I'd like to see more of it.
Yeah, I think we'll see more of him again. I think that it'll be, as I said, back and forth between Japan and Bellator.
Now, do you want to talk about some of the other bantamweight fights? Did you see Patrick Mix and Bandejas?
Yeah, I saw that. That was the one on the main card, wasn't it? With the
Yep.
yeah, he got an undefeated bantamweight. I don't know much about him other than what I saw, but it was an impressive performance, and I think that he might be. I know that's a big criticism with Bellator is they're just not very deep, and so I mean he might be the one who gets the next call against Horiguchi.
And that would be interesting. Mix has, he won with a rear naked choke that he, basically sunk in standing and, in about a minute. And, I'll give a shout out to Bandejas. He comes from the Northeast, and that fighting leagues that he took part in are pretty solid little leagues. They have fed a lot of other fighters into the UFC and stuff. It just wasn't his night, and he didn't get a chance to show him. I'm sure he's, to show anything. So I'm sure he's disappointed. Mix, I think, moves on with, he gets put on the list of people I want to see again. You know what I mean? He almost has that John Dodson kind of magic-y, kind of weird feel, after just seeing him for about a minute. So I liked it. I liked what I saw there. Did you catch Dantas and Archuleta?
Yeah, I think Archuleta 23-1, and I think he's a real contender there at 145 pounds. I believe that that's the same division that AJ McKee fights at, though, and I think that there's some solid people getting brought up in Bellator. He's like I think 5-0 now. Archuleta, that is, inside Bellator. And like I've said before, what I want to see more with Bellator is bringing up organic talent that has been brought up and produced under their banner. This is a Bellator star, and I'd like to see them stay. I'd like to see these be people that they're not using Bellator to make a name, and the first opportunity they get when their contract expires, they run to the UFC. I want to see them have a talent pool there to where I want to see where it gets to the point where we've got champions in both Bellator and UFC that have great records or killing people. Kind of back the last time I remember this was when Nick Diaz was really running through everybody in Strikeforce and was very popular, probably without a doubt at the time the most popular fighter in MMA that was not in the UFC. A lot of people wanted to see him fight George St. Pierre. Well, it actually took the UFC Strikeforce folding and him coming to the UFC, fighting BJ Penn and Carlos Condit, then getting the fight with St. Pierre. It happened in the UFC. We still have yet to see where if that would have continued for 5 more years, though, if Diaz's popularity would have just kept rising, he would have kept winning. He would have refused to come to the UFC. He had a great contract there. He was a dominant champion. And then the UFC has the same thing going on with the champion. Then I think we get into this position where we might see something happen someday. But until that happens, we're not going to see that. So I want to see Bellator have more young talent that's coming up, that's fighting each other. It makes Bellator exciting. It makes Bellator competitive. And I think we could see some fun stuff in the future with possible cross-promotion stuff if we see that kind of stuff going forward.
Your only chance at seeing that is if Endeavor and the new owners of the UFC decide to go in a different direction after Dana White has been sunsetted. And White's got a few more years on his agreement to stay with Endeavor, and after that, they'll probably want to keep him. He may even stay on. So you never know, but that won't work under Dana White's reign. I don't think. I think unless he's really going to do a 180 on his philosophies, he's not looking to partner with Bellator. There's no benefit to it.
Yeah, he tried that once. He tried that once with Pride and Chuck Liddell, and it came back to bite him. But that was them more. They were shooting up. They were trying to go. They were the smaller promotion.
That's the big difference.
Going over to Pride today, it'd be them shooting down to mess with Bellator.
One of the things that I remember that I laughed out loud watching that show because of all the little signals of disrespect that you could send. Here's the UFC's champion and Dana's guy, Now, on top of that, it's almost like a little slap at Dana. It's Dana's guy, Chuck, going over there. And when they introduced him and he came out for his first fight, they misspelled his name and put Chack, Chack. And not a lot of people remember that, but I mean, that's about as deliberate a little slap as you want to take. And that was, kind of a sign of how Pride really was arrogant and thought, that they were bigger. And they were bigger at that time, but Dana was coming for him, and they didn't realize that they just slapped a giant, I guess, But yeah, I remember that. I Chack. I think that I called Chuck Liddell Chack probably for 5 years after that. Nobody would get it, but if you look at the lights, it said Chack. I don't think the UFC may not even release that anymore, or may cut that part out of the video. But the original the light show introduced him as Chack Liddell.
That's hilarious. But good talking with you, Miguel. And,
yes, sir. We're wrapping up Bellator 222. I've been joined by Devin Miller. As always, he's keeping an eye out on the full card, delivered information and assessments on what Bellator had to do. Obviously, at Madison Square Garden, a good night for Bellator. We'd like to see more of this type of stuff, more homegrown talent. And I got to be honest with you, and in my own day, I had a reputation too, but less 18 fight cards, dudes. Come on. I mean, there's no physical way people could sit through every fight. And at the end of the day, if you're trying to get your product out there, I don't want to be one of the fighters or to see our sport turn into boxing where all the undercard fights fight in front of an empty arena. You know what I mean? So just something to keep an eye on. Other than that, I'll give them a B+ for the overall show. A little geriatric action in the co-feature is not my style, so they earned a solid B+ for me. What would you rate them here as we sign off?
I think a B is appropriate, and I agree with you. In my opinion, I don't even like with the UFC with the undercard prelims. 5-fight prelim card, 5-fight main card. I wish they'd go back to 10-fight cards. I mean, if they want to do one every week, if Bellator wants to do one every other week, that's probably manageable. 18-fight cards, not necessary, but I think that's probably them just trying to get people under their banner and get them developing where they have some form of control over them, where they can maybe sign these developing pros to a 5-fight, $2,000 per fight contract or something, to where they're at Bellator and they're wearing the Bellator shirt around and they're fighting like at 4:00 in the afternoon in front of nobody. But I'm a Bellator fighter, man. I fight for Bellator. Bellator can start getting their eye on them and maybe grooming them. If that's their philosophy, that's cool. I think because I think that they need to start developing people and getting young talent. But when you look at some of these guys, some of them are like 2-4. Like it's like these are. It's just like, are they just grabbing random people and
Yeah,
fighting?
you don't need a huge amount of MMA knowledge to assess some of their talent as really being not ready for prime time, may never be ready for prime time kind of thing. Not putting anyone down, because obviously anybody that gets in the ring is taking a risk and really at some point putting it all on the line kind of thing. So I'm not trying to put anyone down, but again, they're charging money, and to me, I mean, I've done 18 fight shows, don't get me wrong, but you could have a feeder system of shows, or maybe a show the night before at a smaller arena, or several other formulas have been tried, kind of thing, or but 18 fights, there's just no way, and normal fans can sit through that, and that's a little bit of a brutal part of it. I sat at home and I had to get up and pace around every once in a while just because I couldn't take sitting around in a seat for the all 18 fights. So anyway, we'll leave it at that. Any final words, Dev? Who's your fighter of the night?
I'd probably say Lyoto Machida.
Okay.
Come on, probably the best performance of the night. I thought that was
I think that's fair.
And here's a little interesting note about Lyoto Machida. He's since Bader is a 2-division champion right now, he actually holds wins over the heavyweight champion, the light heavyweight champion, well, they're the same man, and he holds a win over Gegard Mousasi at middleweight, who's their middleweight champion. So he's actually Lyoto Machida is somebody.
Baker's scary again.
Yeah, like I kind of wonder if Lyoto might try that, might try to fight Mousasi again and fight Bader. And we might see him with 3 belts before he goes out. That'd be great to add to his career before he goes out. I don't think he beats Bader or Mousasi now, but I just possibly.
We'll see. It's interesting when Lyoto came up. He came up and he was fighting as a heavyweight, and a lot of, at one point I think he was starting to get into the pound for pound conversations. This was prior to being in the UFC. But like around the time where, if you look at the BJ Penn fight, BJ Penn called him out very specifically for a reason. That's because Lyoto Machida was a guy whose reputation was beginning to get huge. And he was a guy who was starting to back it up. And if you look at the BJ Penn fight, I mean, BJ never really threatened. I don't think Lyoto took it 100% seriously, but, BJ never really threatened. I think around that time, that Lyoto was capable of anything. Now, approaching 40, I'm not sure. But, hey.
With a fresh haircut over here.
There we go. We got a second-generation Miller there. How you doing?
Good.
Good, little guy.
Yeah, he'll be our next analyst someday.
Did he watch Bellator with you?
Did you watch Bellator with me last night? Did you watch some fights with me? A little bit. He's into WWE.
We'll have to have him on for one of those then.
Yeah, who's your favorite? Roman Reigns.
Roman Reigns. Oh, I gotta disagree with you on that, but we'll have to talk about that on a separate podcast.
Yeah.
I'm Miguel Iturrate. That's Devin Miller, and what's the little guy's name?
Real quick, one last thing about Machida. You were talking about him being up there on the pound for pound list. I won't ever forget him going and knocking out an undefeated. I mean, that was one of the few times we've seen undefeated versus undefeated. Undefeated Rashad Evans defending his light heavyweight title against undefeated Machida. And Machida knocking him cold, running around with his hands in the air, and Joe Rogan saying those classic words, "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Machida era." He was expected to dominate. Shogun Hua comes in from Pride, shuts it all down. And, it was and then John Jones came along, and I won't ever forget John Jones, that image of Jones choking him unconscious, and we used to want that. I wanted that to, like, a black and white photo of that hung up with Jones walking away with Machida just starched on the ground unconscious. It's such an iconic photo of Jones just walking away effortlessly with Machida out. But Machida was somebody, like you said, even before the UFC had a lot. I was young. I was a new fan, but I even remember those days. he was allowed a lot of hype, comes in, is killing everybody, and basically Shogun and Jones come along, and the whole what was going to be a dominant championship career went out the window. But he's still been, I mean, when you look at his resume, he should have won the fight over Quentin Jackson. I can't believe they gave him that decision, but he's got Ryan Bader on his hit list. He's got technically a win over Shogun on his hit list. Rashad Evans, a lot of great fighters. So he's been around. He's been around for a long time, and I think that I would be shocked if he doesn't fight Bader next in a rematch, just because he's got the win there. They need a name for Bader, so I think that he's going to probably try to fight for Bader's light heavyweight belt next.
All right, we've gone long. I'm Miguel Iturrate. That's Devin Miller. We're wrapping up Bellator 22. They were at Madison Square Garden. Neiman Gracie fades in the main event. MacDonald advances in the Grand Prix. Lyoto Machida knocks out Chael Sonnen. And we talked about a bevy of bantamweights out there. Hot action at Bellator. Overall grade for the show, BB+. I'm Miguel Iturrate for the CRP.